Gregory Diamant, who has been studying fascism for many, many years and has prepared a presentation on fascism yesterday, today, and tomorrow. So I hope you enjoy his talk. Well, you really enjoy a talk on fascism. I hope you find it illuminating and provocative, because we will have a discussion afterwards. And we'll invite your questions and comments. Okay, Gregory.
Thank you, Cliff, and thank you all for coming. Well, in the first part of Vittorio De Sica's brilliant film, Yesterday, Today, and Tomorrow, the character of Adelina, played by Sofia Loren, a working-class Neapolitan woman, must be continuously pregnant in order legally to avoid going to jail. Her poor husband, played by Marcello Mastroianni, becomes exhausted by the demands of sex, taking care of an ever-expanding brood, and the constant scramble for money. Ultimately, Adelina tries to enlist a friend to try and impregnate her once again. Well, isn't capitalism often pregnant with fascism and other stillborn monsters? Aren't we, the people, like Adelina's poor husband, exhausted by the imperatives of capitalism for the creation of more and more wealth, obscene wealth for the many, and for the few, and not much for the many? Gross inequality, racism and misogyny, work insecurity, the existential threat of climate collapse, and the criminalization of poverty, aren't those enough for many of us to throw up our hands and retreat to an inner space, a sort of intellectual cocoon? How can we struggle to overcome these threats and the often pervasive feelings of powerlessness? In 1939, Max Horkheimer, a philosopher and cultural critic and an emigre from Nazi Germany, said, quote, "Whoever is not prepared to talk about capitalism should also remain silent about fascism," end quote. Well, let's not talk about both. Fascism is a word often used to describe anything oppressive, a term of opprobrium that conjures up the odor of sulphur. But doesn't using it in that way muddle our thinking? It takes the political reality of fascism out of our lived history and places it in an ahistorical zone that seems to float over politics. Using it in this way thus masks the real nature of our political economic system, capitalism, and helps to unplug the will to struggle in a critical way for change. How can we posit a vision of the future if we don't really understand our past and present? If so much that we characterize as bad is fascist, well, what does the word really mean? Fascism was born in the womb of capitalism as part of the ongoing struggle among classes. Its most immediate antecedents can be seen in the cultural pessimism of Europe in the late 19th century and a cultural modernism that took root at the same time. Cultural pessimism was an outgrowth of increasing wealth that had as one of its artifacts the decadence that was expressed in the arts and in social mores. Modernism in the arts also took root then, and was in many ways a reaction to the perceived placidity of that time, and later found its expression in a new technology that had been developed, such as cinema, and was stimulated by the upheavals of the First World War and the Bolshevik Revolution. In Italy, the futurist movement exalted speed and metal and was a forebear of the Mussolini Revolution. In the new Soviet Union, similar movements developed, but with an exaltation of the working man and woman. In some ways, we can see the form that the politics of classical fascism took from the left-wing Jacobinism of the French Revolution. Mass mobilization, plebiscites, the concept of the nation and sacred soil, all these can be seen in revolutionary France, and in one way or another were adopted and modified by 20th century fascism. Post-World War I Europe seemed to be a world turned upside down. The devastation of the war and the subsequent Spanish flu epidemic both caused the crippling and deaths of millions. Revolutions, change of borders with the resultant stranding of populations in newly created countries, and then followed by inflation and the coming of the Depression, all contributed to the feeling that all bets were off, or as the Cole Porter sound would have it, anything goes. But the impact to all of this topsy-turvy change is that many people rightly felt they had no part in the creation of the new political and geographic reality. They were merely objects to be manipulated, and not subjects. The elites made the changes, and the people were crammed into the back of the train, riding in the caboose, inhaling the engine smoke. This led to an understandable reaction, the need for stability and order. There is no doubt that at that time, capitalism was in crisis. Despite the cultural promotion of the Roaring Twenties, wages were stagnant in the US for a majority of the population, and there was a crisis in agriculture that exacerbated rural poverty. Farmers were in terrible debt and could not bring their produce to market in a way that allowed them to free themselves from financial chains. Debt peonage was thus rife in America. And this was also true of a majority of working class people. Of course, once the stock market crashed in 1929, all the weaknesses of American capitalism were laid bare. Overproduction led to warehouses full of unsaleable goods. Small banks and businesses collapsed due to unpayable loans, and unemployment and underemployment soared. In the US, incipient fascist movements were developing, as exemplified by the American Legion and the America Firsters. Among their historical antecedents is the anti-Catholic and anti-Irish party, the Know-Nothings of the 1850s. Of course, there is no classical fascism without anti-communism, and the Red Scare, the Palmer raids, the violence against those doing union organizing, and not to mention the racism and violence of the Ku Klux Klan and other pernicious organizations were bubbling in the heart of American society. Huey Long of Louisiana was positioning himself as a populist leader, and might have ultimately been a fascist Mussolini mold had he not been assassinated in 1935. Today, we speak of classical fascism of the first part of the 20th century and newer outgrowths such as post-fascism and neo-fascism. For a good overall definition, we could say with Samir Amin, quote, that fascism is a particular political response to the challenges with which the management of capitalist society may be confronted in specific circumstances. Well, I know that's a mouthful. But in simpler terms, what that means is that fascism, is part of the toolkit used when needed by the ruling elites in the ongoing class war to combat challenges to their hegemony. The classical fascism of Mussolini, Hitler, Franco, and others was always willing to manage society and the government without challenging the fundamental principles of capitalism, whether they be the existence of private capitalist property or monopoly capitalism itself. Even though fascists often gave virulent speeches attacking plutocracy or capitalism, and we can hear their echo today, they were fundamentally blowing smoke in order to appeal to the masses. In fact, under fascist governments, profits were generally up for major firms, who were then able to buy out smaller ones and expand, because those smaller ones could not adhere to new regulations that were instituted as the countries prepared for war. In all cases where fascism ultimately became the dominant political form, the support of big business and other conservative forces such as churches were a crucial factor in the rise of fascism. When a capitalist society is in crisis, the clear fascist choice is the subversion and rejection of democracy. This rejection throws out the diversity of opinions, standard electoral procedures, or the guarantee of the rights of a minority, and instead inserts the principle of submission to a leader and his myrmidons. Ideas tend to be backward-looking, with the concomitant promotion of national myths and political and historical fairy tales. As an example, we can clearly see that today in India, where the Modi reactionary government is downgrading the accomplishments of the Mughal Islamic period and rewriting history to falsely embellish Hindu rulers, as well as in other places, where race and nation become touchstones of the ruling ideology. The reactionary nature of plebiscites becomes clear, as their use destroys the process of collective leadership, and instead instills a relationship between people and leader, the nation and the chief. They have the effect of reducing complex issues to a simple binary. A current example is the referendum in the UK regarding Brexit, in which the manipulation and twisting of facts becomes the locus of politics, and victimhood is a theme carried to ridiculous extremes. The ruler, in his or her embodiment of the nation, becomes a victim in a perverse retelling of the story of the Christ. Witness Duterte in the Philippines, complaining that the criticisms of women regarding his brutality and misogyny are a hurtful limiting of his right to speech. Poor Duterte is the victim, he who has advocated rape and the shooting of women in their vaginas. The spectacle, mass rallies, torchlight parades, simplistic speeches that natively characterize the other and promote national myths become another substitute for the exercising of a critical politics. The education of the young primarily consists of drumming in their heads the idea of overall submission to a leader and intellectual submission to the national myths propagated by the leading circles.
Just leave it open.
Just ignore the door.
But leave it open.
Sorry about that.
Leave it open, Cliff.
Yeah, leave it open.
There's nobody else here.
Okay. There is also a strong reinforcing relationship between fascism and the irrational. Some of its features are the cult of combat, a romantic impulse to create a national mystique, the concomitant invention of the mythical past, and the creation of a modern and toxic masculinity with a circumscribed role for women as nurturers and birthing factories. Again, late 19th century cultural pessimism followed by post-World War I reactionary modernism helped to set the stage for revolutionary fascism and its marriage to the irrational. As I touched on earlier, anti-communism is an essential feature of classical fascism. The aborted attempts at revolution outside Bolshevik Russia led to a growing fear of Judeo-Bolshevism. As Walter Benjamin brutally stated, quote, "Behind every fascism is a failed revolution," end quote. This year, 2019, marks the 100th anniversary of the murders of Rosa Luxemburg and Karl Liebknecht, the leaders of the failed Spartacus uprising in Berlin, and surely Benjamin had that in mind. In Germany, the fratricidal struggle between the Social Democrats and the Communists fatally weakened the progressive forces and left an opening for the conservative forces to install Hitler. The emasculation of unions and political parties that support workers' rights also became a prime focus of the fascist political project. This focus, along with the loosening of regulations that may constrain businesses other than those regarding production for the military, were a boon to the capitalist class. One other important concept to explore, is the relationship between coercion and consent. We all know that outright coercion, the fear of punishment, loss, and death, can manufacture consent. This is clearly evident in the classical fascism of the 20th century. In our era, we will have to explore how more subtle uses of coercion, such as "there is no alternative," can be used to manufacture consent. But let's turn to the 21st century. Some new terms have entered our political lexicon, such as post-fascism and neo-fascism. Another word that has a longer pedigree extending back to the 19th century is populism. It has been and is being used to describe forces both on the left and the right. But we need to explore these concepts in some detail. Populism is never one set thing. It has many elements that are constantly changing and combining. In the United States, 130 years ago, populism was seen as a revolt by the smaller agricultural elements against the bankers and major industrial compounds. It also questioned the stability of the greenback and what lay behind the value of money. Today, in the USA and Europe, populism is mostly viewed as a right-wing phenomenon, but much of its rhetoric rails against the elite and how they have ignored the common woman or man, and to some degree is an echo of much of what was said by many in Occupy in the US and Podemos in Spain. However, the populist parties in Europe, for example, are characterized by xenophobia and racism, and exist precisely to exclude the most marginal elements of society, particularly immigrants and non-Christians. Marco Ravelli is thus right to define right-wing populism as a senile disorder of liberal democracy, a revolt of the included, i.e. white Christians, who have been pushed to the margins. And maybe we could talk about that in our Q&A later. Left-wing populism, on the other hand, tries to be inclusive and supports the struggles of people of color and immigrants, while also railing against the elite, the 1%, and their institutions. Right-wing populism gives lip service to democracy and participates in the electoral process, but similarly to the fascism of old, gives pride of place to national myths, and today feeds the flames of worry over demographic changes that they feel will see their societies overrun by a sea of brown, the others. Both left and right-wing populism, for the most part, do not either see a way to overcome the neoliberal project, or they have made peace with it. Populism is more a style than an ideology. It exalts the people, however defined, versus the elite. Populism is against the system, and it has as many snakes as Medusa's head has. It can be applied to a plethora of groups, and it says more about those who use it than as a political definition. It is extremely fungible, and it tends to erase a clear definition between the left and the right. The 20th century revolutions have mostly been defeated and or transformed. Capitalism has not been transcended. It lives on, continuously throwing up contradictions that it has to overcome with new forms of oppression. The social democratic parties, and that includes the Democratic Party, embraced anti-communism and neoliberalism and left the door open for alternative reactionary forces to appear. At this point, the radical right is the greatest force opposed to the system. It is xenophobic, Islamophobic, nationalistic, and embraces authoritarianism, but it is not anti-capitalist. In many ways similar to classical fascism, right-wing populism gives the masses the illusion of being actors as opposed to being spectators. We need only look at Orban's Hungary and other autocratic states to see the truth of this. Post-fascism and neo-fascism, two words, two realities that were birthed by the same mother and describe some of the challenges we faced. Post-fascism can be seen as a magnetic field where different movements, parties, and regimes can locate themselves. Steve Bannon is diligently working to create a right-wing international that will serve as a nourishing womb for autocratic parties and regimes, where tactics and strategies can be devised to promote reactionary utopias in which nationalism is the civic religion and traditional religion can become a support for a reactionary, hegemonic project. Right-wing populism is part of this story, and the lines between it and post-fascism are increasingly blurred. They do not, as classical fascism did not, seek to overturn capitalism and replace it with a different socioeconomic system. They often will keep representative democracy as a soft way to help manage consent, and for the most part will eschew outright violence and use the legal system and enforcement of old and newly created laws as a way of keeping people in line. Post-fascism in Europe and the US is enriched by the soil of cultural despair and victimhood. Demographic changes, they say, are ruining the nation, and uppity women are fomenting male impotence, thus lowering the birth rate for the desired type of babies. Spectacle will be an important part of the rule by reactionary forces. Propaganda that exalts the nation and its myths, along with the drumming into people's heads that there is no alternative, that to dream progressive dreams is traitorous. These will be weapons used to keep challenges at bay. Of course, if people begin to revolt and the ruling classes see that they may be in danger, soft tactics will give way to outright violence to enforce consent. Suspension of civil liberties and the rule of law, however flawed, and the hard tactics of consent will come to the fore. Neo-fascism is a term that can be applied to those movements who look to the past of classical fascism as their inspiration for the future. Not for them the niceties of representative democracy or the fine edges of the legal system. For them, the cudgel is always near to hand, and they make very little attempt to hide their racism. They want a leader who can embody their toxic ideas and apply them while inspiring the masses to crush the other. They even like dressing up in uniforms that echo those of Mussolini, the black shirts, or Hitler, brown shirts, with badges that are slightly different from those worn by classical fascists. We can sometimes view them as ridiculous holdovers from the past, but we do so at our peril. Before concluding, I must take a little side journey. We live in an era when space has temporarily conquered time. Well, what does that mean? It signifies a time when the citizen has been replaced by the consumer, when the city has become all-pervasive, both physically and culturally, and where the old quotidian rhythms no longer apply. Sowing, reaping, and harvesting are foreign to most of us. We are familiar with rats and pigeons, but not so much with foxes and orioles. The contrast between the city and the country is no longer so defined. We leave the city to find ourselves in a suburban space of sameness, where most of us are watching the same program on television, or landing on the same websites, and having many of our experiences mediated by digital devices. In a way, time, as our forebears knew it, no longer exists. But time may yet have the last laugh. In the wildly popular television program, Game of Thrones, there is the meme, winter is coming. For us, the meme should be, the storm is coming. Today, nature may seem to be vanquished by the ocean of concrete and glass that covers our landmass. But nature's power has yet to be fully shown. It has unwittingly been augmented by the carbon and methane that we have pumped into the air and ocean over the last 200 years. We have created our own super Godzilla that is ready to put paid to our pretensions of mastery. But against this monster that is ready to lay waste to our world, are a potential army of the young and the committed of any age that is ready to do battle with our own thoughtless selves. This army may yet find an ally in nature and time as it struggles to find a new balance for our planetary metabolism. But let's return from our short but monstrous side trip to consider our possible future as we struggle with the earthly political monsters of late capitalism, reactionary populism as it grows into post-fascism, and the festering detritus of neo-fascism, all of them nourished by selfishness, misanthropy, and austerity. The past 40 years of neoliberal policies has eviscerated the left. Unions and working class parties have either been terribly wounded or kept to the extreme margins. Left parties and movements in Europe, for example, are tearing themselves apart over the question of immigration. It is sad to say that today the left, for the most part, exhibits a critical thought as sophisticated as it is politically impotent. Still, there are many sparks of hope that are ready to burst forth in new types of progressive actions. Awareness of the environmental challenges has grown immensely. The neoliberal nostrums are beginning to lose their power over many people's thoughts. Many of us are daring to dream again, progressive dreams, to counter our rebarbative reality. Hope is slowly, tentatively spreading its wings to shelter us as we imagine a different type of future than in the past we took for granted. What will the confluence of environmental stresses and political reaction bring? Who can say? But I know that without hope and action to build a different future, entropy will control us. We have to take action and be the subjects of our present and future reality. Well, I am neither an optimist nor a pessimist, as both words imply a lack of thought. They are an emotional response to situations that require critical thinking, as painful and difficult as that may be. I have hope, but hope must be put into action. Actions that will lead to transcending capitalism and closing off the path to fascism and other stillborn monsters of late capitalism, among which we must include the environmental challenges we face. So, let's dream, let's act progressively, so that we can ensure that our future is not behind us. Thank you. Okay. What is?
Cliff, somebody, would you unlock the door? I need a little air. I have a problem being shut in. Thank you.
This gentleman in the back.
Is there any possibility of getting a hard copy of your talk? I personally can't ponder what you say in a sentence, because then you're on to another thing, which is what a lecture is. And I just wonder, I would love to get it and really think about it.
Well, I will be sending a hard copy to Global Justice.
Perfect.
And they will put it up on their website along with this video, which hopefully has a good close-up of me.
Yes.
Anyway, so you'll be able to, I don't know when it will be put up, but I can send it this afternoon and we'll see what happens.
Thank you.
Yes,
I can't do a
How do you
video.
equate
No,
capitalism
I could put
what today is referred to as democratic socialism? We find it, at least in Northern Europe.
Okay, that's a very good question. I think the question maybe is, what is democratic socialism? And I think there are many answers to that question, not all of which I'm prepared to give, because if you speak to different people who characterize themselves as democratic socialists, they will have different feels about it. Some of them feel that there could be something like a market socialism, so it retains some of the characteristics of capitalism, but exalts the cooperative, collective action, et cetera, along with, of course, democracy in the workplace as well as in the real democracy in the political field, not just the what I think is the false representative democracy that we have. Other people may have more of a radical take on it and not look to have the inclusion of some capitalist holdovers within it. So I think that's a debate that's ongoing and a very fruitful one. And we're probably going to hear more about it as more and more people see that the term democratic socialism is not a scary, monstrous term and has some reality. And as more and more people get into government who claim to be democratic socialists, as we do have a good sprinkling of now, that will change. So I think I cannot give you I know I cannot give you a definitive answer, but I think it's a question that is ongoing and has to be. And I think all these things about where are we going from here, or how do we get from here to there, that has to come not out of intellectual thought necessarily, but it comes out of struggle. As I said about taking action. And when you do things, when you take action, you see things in a different way than just sitting at home and reading things, perhaps. So it changes your mind and things become refined. So what is going to be in the future, or what those definitions will be, that's going to come out of struggle. That's going to come out of people working together to change things. I strongly believe that. That's been my experience. Yes, ma'am.
I just wanted to thank you because I agree that fascism is late, savage, what I call savage capitalism. That's what fascism is. And it involves corporate control along with military force in the way I understand fascism. And my problem is that in the US, both parties are being paid for by very large corporations. I think that someone like Bernie Sanders is trying to educate people what social democracy can be. And I think there's a huge job making people understand that. But I think he is an independent. He's really outside of parties. And so that's my voice of optimism for the future. And I think the millennials get him. They get him. And I hope some older people can start to learn what he's trying to say.
Okay. Good point. Yes, sir.
I think there's a gorilla behind the wings. I'm thinking Yanis Varoufakis has been into this narrative that capitalism is about to destroy itself through automation, artificial intelligence, robotics, and so on. That the machine intelligence is on a rapid rise, pretty much out of the view of most people, and that it's going to ultimately destroy capitalism.
Well, interesting that you should say that. I know what Yanis has said. He's talking about Yanis Varoufakis, who is the former finance minister of Greece, and has been one of the people who's created this movement in Europe called the M25, and trying to democratize things in Europe, etc. And he calls himself some kind of mixed-up Marxist. But interesting you should bring that up, because I gave a talk about exactly those points about a year or so ago. And yes, what the future will bring in terms of automation. There's also the question of guaranteed income and all of those things which go along with it, people not having jobs and the influence of technology. I didn't put it in here because I thought it would be too much of a side, and we've talked about it before, but yes, it's a very important point and obviously affects the politics going forward. As people have fewer jobs that pay well, because the jobs that will exist don't pay as well, what's going to be the role of the guaranteed income? What's going to be the role of the social safety net? I mean, the United States is crazy, right? We don't have guaranteed health care for our population, which most other industrialized countries have. So how will people survive in those kind of conditions? What will be the training for people who are in other things, such as coal miners? That's being talked a lot about. Where do they go from here? What's going to be their future, their children's future? So all of these are things that are going to come out again in struggle, are going to come out again in study as well. And the changes in technology are here, and more of them will be coming. The question is how to use them. And then also recognizing which are deleterious to the health of the population, not just their physical health, but their mental health and their social health, and which can be used in a progressive form. And that's the challenge, one of the challenges that we on the left face. So thank you for that. Yes, sir.
Thank you very much for your talk. I want to make a couple of comments, and like you, I will rely on the classic experience because I think it has so much to teach us. My classic experience, Germany and Italy in particular. And I think that one of the things that's really important to acknowledge is that, and you touched on it, but I want to sort of bring it out a little bit more, that fascism is a very specific kind of social and political phenomenon. It emerges in the wake of World War I, not only because of the incredible devastation wrought on the world by that experience, but also because of the very real threat of social revolution. You mentioned Russia, you mentioned Germany, but if we look across Western Europe, we see other examples of social upheaval where the prospect of a repetition of what had happened in Russia was very much on the cards. And throughout the decade of the 1920s and the 1930s, even though those revolutions weren't successful, and even though the Russian Revolution collapses in the 1920s, I would argue, and morphs into something else, the fact is that the 20s and 30s remain an era in which the old capitalist class is never able to really reestablish the old order. And it's in those circumstances, with a mass communist movement in Germany throughout the 20s and so on, that relatively small groups of thugs who make their initial living by attacking workers' strikes and attacking the Communist Party and so on in the streets of places like Berlin in the early 20s, over the course of almost 15 years, they morph into becoming, in the case of Germany, the Nazi Party. Hitler, in the early 20s, is only one of a whole variety of similar kinds of figures who are leading gangs of thugs to attack workers and strikes and communists and so on. So right from the very beginning, fascism is about trying to suppress the possibility of revolution. And the other thing that's really, I think, important about it, which you didn't touch on, but you may want to come back to me on this, is that the movement builds not primarily in the working class, and not primarily in the capitalist class, but it builds primarily in the small middle class. So by the time we get to the early 30s, and Hitler is actually becoming more of an option for political power in Germany, you have a movement that is led by the ruined middle class, the petty bourgeoisie, and their vision of the alternative future is one which is both a rejection, nominally, of capitalism and a rejection of communism. So they argue against the communist movement, branding it as Jewish conspiracy and so on, and they argue against capitalism as well. And so Hitler builds a movement called the Brown Shirts, and when he actually attains power, one of the things that he does is there's an event known as the Night of the Long Knives, in which Hitler then sides with the old ruling class and the military apparatus in Germany and slaughters many of the leaders of the movement that he has built over the previous 15 years. Because, of course, they want not only a revolution against labor, they want a revolution against capital as well. And from that point on, what was a petty bourgeois movement becomes a fully capitalist-backed kind of movement, and it takes power and succeeds in smashing the working class. And just one or two final points. One of the things that I think is most important for people to understand about fascism is that a fascist regime cannot tolerate the existence of any organization that it does not control. So that applies to trade unions, but it also applies to church choirs. Any organization that you can imagine or that you know of is not tolerable under a fascist regime. The only regimes that are permitted, or the only organizations that are permitted to exist, are extensions of the regime itself, and fully under its control. And I just want
I
to
think we should let someone
I just want to
speak.
conclude by saying, I think it's really important to be clear about what fascism is and what it isn't, because there are so many people who see fascism evident in everything that goes on in our society today. And I think while we need to be concerned about the growth of the right and different types of the right, we also need to be clear that at the moment in the US and in Canada, we don't face brown shirt movements in the streets trying to smash independent class organizations.
Yes. Someone else had their hand up? Oh.
I'm going to jump a little bit beyond that and talk about the contemporary picture is very different in terms of the powerful forces in society. We don't have strong union movement. So there's issues about whether history will repeat itself in exactly the same shape. I think there'll be a lot of spontaneity that we have no idea what form it's going to take, if it takes form. But I'm curious to know what your thoughts are in terms of what you consider to be progressive action of the sort that might actually have an impact on history.
All right. First of all, I'll just say I really dislike the phrase "history repeats itself." As a historian, I find it fallacious, and history doesn't repeat itself. We see certain things that we have echoes of, but we have new times, we have new ways of reacting with one another, new social and political formations, and therefore they have their own specificity. And that's one of the points of my talk, is that we need to study those things. Secondly, an answer, or a partial answer, and that should be open, everybody should answer this question. What are the kinds of progressive actions going forward do we see? Well, I think one that's very important is the environmental movement. We face, as I mentioned, I believe we face an existential crisis. We have been complacent, I say we, just all of us, for way too long. There's too many things that are going on that need to be done, and the negatives are accelerating at a tremendous speed. And there's people who want to look at a, quote, green capitalism, look at technology as a way to save us and so forth. And yes, there's going to be technological things to look at, and maybe certain stopgap measures. But it is not an ecological problem per se. It is a political and social one. And that's what I think we're starting to see with the movement of the young people. When I see what Greta Thunberg, the 16-year-old in Sweden, has done, who today was nominated for the Nobel Peace Prize as an example, it has to warm your heart. And what other people, young people, are doing in that area, as well as we older people. So I think that's really important. What are those things, and holding our politicians and our leaders and corporate leaders' feet to the proverbial fire, because all of our feet are in the fire of climate change. So that's one thing. Other thing specifically is going to be the question of technology, as this gentleman brought up, and how do we struggle against that? How do we organize ourselves in a more collective way? How do we organize against the spectacle, and I talked about that. You have the mass rallies of Trump, which have been going on and will continue to go on as a way of diverting people from what they're doing and also about pointing at the other as the problem. So I think all of those things are part of the struggle that goes on and will help us in our critical thinking of how do we go forward. For me, how do we change the system? Things like struggle against minimum wage, against racism and misogyny in any forms, the dumping of garbage plants in poor areas, and how poor areas are affected most by climate change. All of these things are part of the progressive struggles that I see are beginning to go on, and that we need to fuel and continue. So I think that's very, very important. But I think everybody's got Cliff.
Thinking of the notion that behind fascism lies failed revolution, I'd like to apply that to the situation that exists now in Mexico with the administration of AMLO. Really a very ambitious project to try to transform Mexican society in what are, in many ways, revolutionary directions. Whether that will succeed or not is an open question. I don't know that we can speculate on that. But I wonder if it does not succeed, if it fails, his effort to turn Mexico away from the neoliberalism that has dominated it for the last half century. If that fails, what is the fallout? Is it the possibility of fascism arising here? I know we can't answer that question, but I pose it in order to highlight the importance of this moment in Mexico's history.
Quite right. Anyone wish to come? Yes.
Well, I don't have an answer to Cliff's question, but I guess I wanted to comment and then ask for your comments as well about how people should respond when we do have these neo-fascists marching as they did, say, in Charlottesville. You know, it seems like they're just, you know, a bunch of kooks, and they're harkening back to an old, you know, era with wearing sort of pseudo swastikas and this kind of thing. But they are trying to build, they have been emboldened by having Mr. Trump in office, and they are trying to build a bigger movement. And people, you mentioned people like Steve Bannon. What I think, when you know, Charlottesville was the number of people protesting the right was not that much bigger than they were themselves. But a few days later in Boston, there were 50,000 people, even though, I forget forget her first name, but higher, a woman was killed by somebody running their car into the anti-fascist demonstrators. In Boston, despite the fear that one could then say, oh, well, we better not go out and protest because somebody might get killed, 50,000 people came out, and that was extremely heartening, anti-fascist. So they had to cancel some of their provocative meetings that they were going to be planning and some of the rallies that they were going to hold. So I think that points the way to how to prevent these kind of movements from, that are just tiny, coups right now, from gaining a foothold, and also from propagating some of the crap, the racist and misogynist kind of crap that is also coming from the White House. So anyway, your comments about that.
Well, thank you for your comments. One of the things I said in my talk was the neo-fascists, and I was talking particularly about them as opposed to the post-fascists, it may seem ridiculous, but we ignore them at our peril. So I think these things have to be struggled against. One of the things is counter-demonstrations and demonstrations are good. They give a feeling, a sense of solidarity to people and can show a certain amount of strength. But I have my question about them, because if they're not followed up by actual organizing, they kind of deflate. And we need more than feel-good actions. We need to be organizing around, as I said earlier, around very specific issues, whatever they may be, that will help all of us to come together and create organizations that will meld together and help lead the struggle and throw up organic leaders in that struggle. And that could be in the form of a party, it can be in the form of collectives, all kinds of different forms that can come. So while demonstrations are good, Lord knows I've been in so many of them, but it's all good, it feels good, but if it's not followed up by concrete action or as part of the continuum of organizing, then ultimately it's sterile. And one of the things that the right is doing very well, and has been doing very well in the United States and in Europe over the last 30, 40 years, is organizing. They have been doing that well, much better than the left has done. And whether they have, on the intellectual level, have funded think tanks, and of course they have access to a lot of money, which the left usually doesn't have, like the Heritage Foundation or Freedom or whatever, in the United States, and all these other things. There's that element which gives the intellectual cachet to what their ideology is, as well as getting people out to vote, getting people to demonstrate, and so forth and so on. Well, we need to do those things too. And we are doing them, but we need to do them to a greater extent. And it's wonderful to see, for instance, what the Parkland students did in a big organization and against government for gun control and so forth. But we need more of that. And we needed to go beyond just electioneering. Electioneering is important, but it is not sufficient. There was a president of Czechoslovakia in the 30s called Beneš. And one of his statements was, for the enemies of democracy, the fist. He was facing up against Hitler and the local Nazis. Well, we need the fist also. And in the Spanish Civil War, the way that the Republicans saluted was not like the Republicans, the progressives. The way they saluted was like this. And we need that, because power is the only way, strength. Power will only give way to other power. Strength will only give way to other strength. And if you've ever dealt with a bully in the schoolyard, you know that ultimately you've got to punch him in the face. You've got to stop him. Talking is not enough. And that's the only way to get them back down. So we need all kinds of things like that. The intellectual, the action, and sometimes we'll have to get violent. I do not like what goes on with what I see sometimes been going on is what I call, for lack of a better term, it's an aristocratic Jacobinism of the black box people who will go on a demonstration and smash windows and everything like that. It's sterile and it's counterproductive. I believe there's a place for violence, and nonviolence mostly, but they are tactics and strategies, and that's what we have to learn and use them in a focused way when necessary. So I don't like that aristocratic Jacobinism. It's not helpful. Anyway, okay.
I just want to follow that up, because if that in fact becomes an element of
what is the it?
The aristocratic Jacobinism, the black shirt, movement. If that in fact becomes an element in a broad progressive movement, if there is an element of more radical militancy, and I suspect there will be, and probably none of us are going to be part of it. I can hardly run anymore. The question I think part of the question becomes, how do we react to those actions? How do we react if there's a group of people that close a bridge and everyone's complaining about it, can't get the work on time? How do we react if there are people that throw rocks through windows who basically, on a lot of fronts, share our visions? Do we throw them under the bus, or do we find a way to talk about them, work with them, etc., as part of this progressive uprising?
Okay, I've always been all for radical militancy. That's been part of what I've done in my past. But organizing is the most important thing. Now, as far as blocking the streets, I don't know how many of you are aware of the environmental young people, mostly young people, who have been blocking the streets in London. And I think it's been good, and it's helped educate the people. There are other things, like just breaking store windows, which I don't think educates anybody. So again, as I said, it's all part of devising strategy and tactics that make sense. And who decides what makes sense? I think we all have to as part of it. So you have to talk to those people and everything like that, and then question them. You have to be almost Socratic. Okay, you want to go there and wear black balaclavas and do all this and do black things? Fine. And you're going to throw stones and break the windows of McDonald's and all of that? Fine. Tell me what you hope to accomplish by that. What is that supposed to do? Etc., etc. How does that relate to the other people here who share your opinion about corporatism, let's say, and wanting change? How does that work? How can we work together? What's the most effective way of doing things? I'm not saying that's going to be successful necessarily, and there are people who are very thick-headed on all sides. But I think that's one of the things you're asking that question is we have to do. We have to confront it. We can't just close our eyes to it or just say, oh, that's bad, or pretend it didn't happen. So I think that's part of the whole development of our activities, of our strategies and our tactics.